Well, to give you a sense of how long things have been heading south in Victoria, it's been over a month since Victoria saw a single daily digit increase. Today is the second day in a row the state's recorded its worst daily increase, and the third time in a week. 7 of the past 8 days have seen more than 200 cases added. My next guest is a journalist who's done more work than anyone, I have to say, in this state to break the stories about this virus, botched quarantine, the scaling back of intensive care equipment, issues with contact tracing, and a whole lot more. The Australian's Victorian political reporter, Rachel Baxendale, joins me now from Melbourne. Rachel, thank you for your coverage. It's been pretty extraordinary. I listened to the Premier's demeanour change when he gets to you in the press conferences because you're asking tough questions. And I think for a long time, to be honest, he has had it easy from the press gallery at Parliament House in Victoria. They've all basically been in love with his spin and they've allowed him to get away. He's under some pressure now. I'm interested, with all the sort of litany of problems we know very well about hotel quarantine, what's worrying me the most at the moment is contact tracing. Tell me what you can tell us about the last few days.
Absolutely. Look, I think that's the biggest challenge we're dealing with at the moment. Full stop. Anecdotally, we're hearing all kinds of horror stories. You know, people whose kids have been sitting next to other kids in classrooms who've tested positive, who haven't been notified by DHHS until 11 days later in one case. I was actually contacted yesterday, I have to say, by my physio to say that the person who was treated before I was by a different physio in a different room, but nonetheless before I was, the client immediately before me on Monday morning has tested positive to COVID. I'm really grateful to my physio for getting in touch with that information, and I think I went to get tested today. The line was so long that I'm going to have to go first thing tomorrow morning, but I haven't been anywhere since I found out that information, and I think it really does highlight the point that this is in the hands of that we can't rely on DHHS to get in touch with people because they're not doing a good enough job at the moment. And this is in the hands of businesses and individuals to do the right thing. And as soon as they find something out to contact everyone who needs to know, because the contact tracers just aren't doing it.
Yeah, just on that point though, people that I've spoken to in the last 3 days say they fear it's now got to the scale in terms of numbers that it's getting beyond them.
I think it absolutely is. I mean, I think we're dealing with so many close contacts and so many cases that we know about that the team's just not big enough to be able to do it. And if you look at some of the numbers, the community transmission numbers, we've got we're almost up to 1,000 cases where there's been no identified source. And we've had, I think DHHS said yesterday, we've had 150 healthcare workers test positive, and they've said that that the majority of those people were community transmissions. That's one of the very few cohorts in society that's actually, being subject to routine testing. And I think the fact that group who are being, a large proportion of them are being subject to routine testing, I think the fact that we're finding so many community transmissions in that group indicates that there's a hell of a lot more virus out there than we know about, and it's increasing exponentially, as we've seen from the confirmed cases over the past couple of weeks.
You broke this week the story that linked the Black Lives Matter protest and the start of cases in the public housing cluster. We know that now numbers over 200. Are you surprised that March was allowed to proceed, knowing those sorts of risks? It was only a month ago now. It's extraordinary. Well, 5 weeks ago.
Yeah, it was 5 weeks last weekend. And look, I was. And it is, I think it's worth highlighting that it is the only gathering that's been that big that has happened in Victoria since March. And look, there are a lot of questions that haven't really been answered about, and certainly I suppose it's important to emphasise that DHHS are saying that their line on this is that there are no cases that they can they can link back, no transmissions that they can link back to the march. But it's also important to emphasise that they haven't responded to questions about, they had only identified up until the other day, up until I wrote my story, they'd only publicly identified 4 people who'd gone to the march and who had tested positive. They then identified an additional 2. I have just about an hour ago, and it should be going up on the Australian's blog now. I'm supposed to be on a day off, but this story never stops. I have received information from DHHS saying that those 2 people tested, they were notified of those positive results on the 21st of June, which was actually the day before they notified that the 4th previously notified case had tested positive. And they didn't even respond to my question about why they hadn't made those further 2 cases public, which I think is quite strange. And they also didn't respond to my question about whether or not they have identified the source of infection for all 6 people. They've just said that, you know, they definitely didn't catch it at the march, end of story. And look, that may be true, but, you know, it's my job to ask these questions and I haven't been receiving very satisfactory answers to them. So, you know, I'm going to keep asking those questions, and I think it's entirely relevant. When we have had, you know, this mass gathering of 10,000 people 5 weeks before we've got, you know, nearly 2,500 active cases in the state, people dying, intensive care wards filling up. You know, I think regardless of if the virus wasn't transmitted at the march, it was sheer good luck. And I think these questions are worth asking. I mean, yes, Andrews government...
Just let me jump in there. It's important you are, because, you know, I've played montages of the Premier and the Health Minister, question after question they were asked, and they just pushed it off to this inquiry. They like to call it a judicial inquiry. It's actually an inquiry by a judge. A judicial inquiry is something very different. It has powers to compel witnesses, as you know, powers to compel documents. They don't have any of that with this inquiry. So this idea that somehow when it lands, this report, we don't even know it's public, come September, that it'll explain away all of this when it doesn't have those compulsion powers, I am concerned it just won't give us the answers we deserve.
Well, and look, I think another key point to mention about that judicial inquiry is that it's been providing a very convenient excuse since it was announced for the Andrews government to just not answer any questions about hotel quarantine or indeed other issues. One thing that came out today is that the reason why the Doherty Institute's saying that they can't release their own genomic sequencing, and we sort of had this back and forth between, you know, whether it was theirs to release or DHHS's to release or the Chief Health Officer's to release. But apparently they can't release that genomic sequencing because it might prejudice this inquiry. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is that sub judice doesn't apply in this case. And I would have thought that if the aim of this inquiry is to find out as much as we possibly can about what went wrong so that we can avoid it happening in future, then we'd actually be doing the judge an inquiry a favour by getting as much information out before she begins her inquiry as we possibly can, so that then she knows, you know, which questions to ask and what she can, what she needs to explore in the very limited amount of time she's got to do it before she needs to present her findings in September.
It is extraordinary, Rachel Baxendale. Well, enjoy your half sort of day off, and we look forward to your coverage back again in the Australian on Monday.
Thanks, Peta.